Ever wonder how to add chords to a melody if they don't give you any chords? Well, today your piano teacher Tim has you covered because I'm going to teach you how to add chords if you're given a melody. This lesson is broken down into three main parts. First, I'm going to teach you about how to figure out what key you're in, really important, and then I'm going to teach you how to figure out what chords you're going to be able to choose from in that key. And then lastly, we're going to go through a sheet of music together, putting everything to work, putting those chords in there. So let's get started. Okay, the first thing I need to teach you about is how to figure out what key that you're in. Now, what does a key tell you exactly? A key tells you what sharps or flats you're going to find throughout a piece. Really important. It tells you a couple other things. It also tells you basically what note all the other notes are centered around. So if you have the key of C and you play the scale of the key of C, it begins and ends on key C. If you're doing the key of A, you're beginning and ending on A. Everything is centered around whatever the name of the key that you're in. Well, how do you figure out what key you're in? Well, the first thing you need to do is know that for every key, there's a major key and a minor key. I'm going to teach you how to figure out the major keys right now. So if there's nothing written there at all, and by the way, all key signatures are designated, or all keys are designated by the key signature, and that tells you, it'll show you what notes are sharp or flat. If there's absolutely nothing written there, like there is, it's either going to be in the key of C major, or it's going to be in the key of A minor. So just keep that in mind. If nothing's written there, that's what you have. Now, I do have a trick for the rest of it, but you have to have some sharps or flats for it to work. So let's do sharps first. Okay, so here we have a sharp here. And if I had a note right where that sharp is, what note would that be? That would be on the top line. Well, that would be F. That tells you that all Fs in the entire piece are sharped, no matter what, unless it tells you otherwise with a natural. Now, the confusing thing is that the sharps or flats that you have aren't necessarily the name of the key that you're in. So keep that in mind. So even though we have an F sharp, that doesn't mean that we're in the key of F. So what key are we in? Well, what you got to do is you got to go to the sharp that's written, and that's F sharp. So let's get this up here. So you want to find F sharp on the piano. Or you can even play regular F. And what you want to do, so you go to the sharp that you have, and then you're going to go one note up from there. So the key is G. Now let me give you a different example so we can kind of get the pattern here. What if there are two sharps? So we know if there's one, you just go to the sharp, you go up one. But it's not always that easy. So here we go. Now we have two sharps. Well, what we're going to do now is you're always going to actually take the sharp all the way to the right. Now, when you only have one sharp, it's just that sharp, but when you have two, it's going to be this one. So one thing you want to determine is what note would that be if I had a note right where that sharp is in that third space up. Well, that would be a C. So our key signature tells us that we have two sharps in the whole song, F and C, and now we have to figure out what key that we're in, because like I said, just because we have F and sharp and C sharp does not mean that we're in the key of F or we're on the key of C. So what you got to do is you got to go to the last sharp, which was C, and you go up one note. What's one note right after C? Well, let's show you on the piano. Here's C, there's D. So we are in the key of D. So what you do is you go to the last sharp all the way to the right, you go to that sharp, and then you just go one note up, and that will give you the answer perfect every time. Now let's do a tricky, a hard example, just to make sure that it checks out. So we're going to do all sharps, all 7 sharps. And as you can see from the thing here, it does tell you the answer. We're in the key of C sharp. Let's check to make sure that this is legitimate. So what do we have to do? Well, you may want to go through and see what sharps that you have, F, C, G, D, A, E. And the last one is B. So what you got to do on the piano is this. This is where it gets tricky, though. Here's B, right? Well, if we go one note up, that's C. But you got to be careful, because remember the key of C had 0 sharp, 0 flats. And the key we want to get to is C sharp. So what gives? Well, do you see that between B and C, and also E and F, but let's look at B and C, there is no sharp in between there. So if you're starting from B, you want to go a whole step, they call it. So you actually want to go up one note and then another note. So say back when we were in the key of D and we had C sharp and we were going from C up to D, we really went up 2 notes. We've been going up 2 notes the whole time. It's just that when we had the black key in between, we can just go up to the next white key. You just got to be careful that when you're on B, you actually have to go up to C sharp and not C. A little confusing at first, but it will make more and more sense as you go. As I mentioned just a second ago or a minute ago, there's a major key and minor key for every key signature. And all the ones we've been doing over the last few minutes have been all major keys. Now, what if it's a minor key? Well, the first thing you want to do is, with every key signature you're given, figure out what major key that you might be in first. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this note right here, the D, and we're going to go up 1 note from there. That's going to be the key of E. So we are in the key of E, or we could be in the key of E major. Or I'm going to show you how to find the minor equivalent. So once you find the major, what you do is not including, this is really important, not including the note you're touching. You go down 1, 2, 3 half steps. So you may be thinking, okay, well that's either the key of C sharp minor or D flat minor, depending on how you look at it. Well, see how we have sharps in our initial key signature? Well, then your resulting key signature when you go to minor will actually be in sharps. So, wait, it was C sharp, not A sharp. And minor is usually designated with a little m and a dash through it, or they'll just write out minor. Now, what if we have the key of C major? Well, real quick, let's go to the piano. We already have our key. So where do you go? You're not including that note. You go down 1, 2, 3. And so the key of A minor, like C major, has 0 sharps, 0 flats in its key signature. Now, if you have a piece, how in the world do you figure out whether you're in major or minor? Well, here's a little tip for you, and I'll show you when we do our example here. But I would say 99% of the time, whatever the first chord is of your piece, and whatever the last chord is of your piece, let's say it's this one all the way over here, I would say 99% of the time, those chords will match whatever key that you're in. So if you're in E major, you're going to expect to see an E major chord between the right hand and the left hand. I won't write it out for right now, but just, keep in mind that it might not appear as a straight chord like that. It might be, broken up between each between each clef. And then the last chord, same kind of thing. You would expect it to be in whatever key that you're in. So if we have this piece, I know it's not much of a piece, we're in the key of E major. And the reasons behind that is it's an E major chord. If we were in C sharp minor, what kind of chord would you expect right in the beginning? Well, you would expect a C sharp minor chord, just like that. So if you had that, that would kind of insinuate, now obviously things do get more complicated sometimes, but that would insinuate that you're probably in the key of C sharp minor. Okay, now I taught you all about how to figure out what key you're in if you have sharps. What about if you have flats? Well, here's the thing. Here's how it works. And it works best if you have 2 or more flats, and I'll explain why. Remember how with the sharps we went all the way to the last one, and then we went up 1 note, and that gave us our answer? Well, this time, it's not that. So just keep in mind that only works for sharps. With flats, what you do is you go to the next to last flat. So you go to the last flat all the way to the right. You go 1 over. So if you only have 2 flats, it's just the first flat that you have, since that's the next to the last one all the way to the right. And then you figure out, okay, what note, if I had a note there, what would it be? Well, that would be B, right? So what you do is you go to B, and since we're talking about flats, you go from B to B flat, and that's your answer. So just to sum it up, you go to the next to last flat, the one all the way to the right is the last one. You go to the one right to the left of that, and then you just figure out what note that would be in flats, and that's your answer. Let's do another example. Although before we move on, what would the relative minor key, just meaning what minor key also shares the same 2 flats? Well, just going from the piano, we have B flat here, and then you're going to go down 1, 2, 3. So the answer that you're looking for is we could also be in the key of G minor. Now, another question that I'm going to, as a review, how are you going to determine whether you're in B flat major or G minor? We'll leave it in the comments if you know. But the answer is, you can pause the video if you need, but the answer is the first and last chords will, most times, you will see it buck the trend, but most times it will match up with whatever key you're in. Okay, now we have 4 flats. So what do we do? Well, remember the process is you go not to the very last one, but you go to the next to last note, and you just kind of figure out what note that would be if it was flat. So it would be the second space up, and then you go to A, but not just A, but you go to A flat right there. So next to last flat, and then you flat that, and that's it. So we're in the key of A flat major. You could also be in 1, 2, 3, counting down, F minor as well, determined by what your first and last chords are. Now, I mentioned that you had to have 2 or more flats for this to work. Well, what if you only have 1 flat? Well, I got bad news for you. Well, maybe good news, depending on who you are. You're just going to have to remember that that's the key of F. Obviously, it doesn't work for that first one because there is no next to last flat. There's only one. So the one you're looking for doesn't even exist. So you just have to remember that that one's F. That's all. Okay, so once you figure out what key you're in, next we need to figure out what chords we can use or even what notes we can use. So let's take a look. Okay, for simplicity's sake and the example that we're using today, let's say we're in the key of C. How do we know we're in the key of C? Well, there's no sharps, no flats, and I'm just going to tell you we're in the key of C major. Now, building on to this, how do we figure out what notes and chords we can use? Well, here we go. Okay, the first thing you need to understand, if you don't already, that the musical alphabet goes from A to G. Help if I knew what the alphabet was. And then what happens? It repeats. So just keep that in mind. If you're not aware of that, you probably are, but just letting you know. And then etc. So here's where this comes in. So what you got to do is once you figure out what key you're in, which is what we spent the last 20 minutes doing, you need to figure out basically what notes you can use. So if we're in the key of C, what you want to do is you want to write out the musical alphabet starting from C. So C, D, E, oops, E, F, G, A. For some reason, this is the hardest part for me to do. All right, so C, starting from C, going in the alphabet, music alphabet order, keep in mind that they repeat here, up to the next C. So these are actually all the notes we get to use in the key of C. Showing you on the piano, quite simply, this marks out the C major scale. So that's another reason it's important to learn your scales. One thing I want to mention is that there's 7 individual notes in the scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and that the last note and the first note are the same. So you don't call this 8th, you would just call it 1 again. Really important. Now, you can build a note, a chord on each note of the scale just by playing that note, evenly spacing a note, evenly spacing a note. Now you have to be very, very careful that when you're doing this, that you have any necessary sharps or flats in the key signature in there. But if we're in the key of C, you don't need to worry about it. But just for an example, if you're doing them in the key of G, anytime you had an F, there'd be an F sharp in there instead. But we don't have to worry about that. So you just build a chord on each of these notes. So now we have 7 chords to choose from. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and C. Now, I'm not going to go over each of the chord qualities and basically how you figure that out, meaning if they're major or minor. But I'm going to tell you right now, for every major key, there's a pattern to it. The first chord's always major. Second and third chord, always minor. Fourth and fifth chord, always major. Sixth chord, minor. Seventh chord, always diminished. And major. So remember that the pattern's major, and then minor, minor, major, major, and then minor, diminished, major. Just keep in mind that the next to last one is the only diminished you have. No augmented chords here, luckily. So now we know the chords we can choose from. These are literally the chords we can pick from when playing our piece. So what I want you to do after that is you want to actually write down these, when you're first beginning anyway, write down the key that you're in as well as the notes you choose from on a piece of paper, just like I did. You don't necessarily even need to write it out in music paper. So what I want you to do now is under each note, each starting note, write out the spelling of the chord. And what I mean by that isn't C-H-O-R-D. It is actually what 3 notes make up that chord. So as you can see in the beginning, we have a C chord with C, E, and G. The next chord's D, F, and A, just spacing out the notes. So I'm just writing out the chords themselves, E, G, B. So just give me a second to do this so I know I do it right. Now, why do I want you to write out all the notes of the chords? Well, when you're actually going through your music, you're actually going to be looking through what note in the melody belongs to any of these chords. So let's actually start putting all this to practice and take a look at an example together. If you found the lesson helpful so far, make sure you smash that like button because it lets other students know that this is a quality lesson they can learn from as well. All right, back to the lesson. Okay, here's our example, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. So what's our first step? Well, we need to figure out what key that we're in. Well, there's nothing written there. So we're probably either in the key of C sharp or A minor. Now, there are no chords written in here, right? So it's kind of a backwards from what I told you, look at the first and last chord to figure out what key that you're in. But I have another suggestion for you. Now, this isn't as common, but still, most of the time, even in the melody, you're going to see some of the notes in the C chord or the A minor chord appear, whichever they are. So take a look at the first 2 notes here and let me know what you think. C, C, G, G. Now the question is, does that fit a C major chord better? Or does that fit an A minor chord better? Well, let's take a look. The C major chord is made up of the notes C, E, and G. Well, hey, I have 2 notes in that chord already in that measure. So we're probably in key C major because at A minor, you only have the C that belongs in that major. So whatever chord has more notes going on in that measure is probably what key you're in. If you have second guesses about it, you can always look it up online. There's a ton of information out, especially on popular pieces or well-known ones. Okay, so we're in the key of C major. So what I want to do is generally you have 1 chord per measure in a piece. Now, is that always true? No. You're going to see a lot of things where you have chords, maybe 2 chords in a measure or something like that. So in general, when you're first starting to do this, you want to only put 1 chord per measure. Now, can you have more than 1 chord per measure? Absolutely. But for a simple song like this, just playing 1 chord with your left hand while playing the right hand, 1 measure at a time, that works out perfect, as you can see. That sounds just fine. So there's no need to figure out a chord for every single note that you have. Okay. So now, this is where it all comes together, everybody. We're going to take this first note of the piece in the measure, and it's C. So what do we have to do now? Well, we have to figure out what notes out of what chords out of all the available chords we had best fits this C. There's actually a bunch of examples because, obviously the C major chord fits it really well, which is probably what we're going to do because, like I said, the first and last chord of the piece, whatever key that you're in, that's probably what we're going to go for. You do A minor as well. Doesn't work quite as well. F sort of works, but not quite. So let me show you one more little tip to better decide these chords. Okay, I have to mention about primary chords. And primary chords are the most common chords you're going to find in music. Can you find other chords other than the primary chords? Absolutely. But the primary chords are 1, 4, and 5. So whatever chord's built on the first note, the 4th note, and the 5th note of the scale, you're going to be seeing those the most. So out of all the chords you have to choose from, you're probably going to be looking there first. So I would say that the C best belongs in a C major chord. That's what key that we're in. So as I play that first measure, I'm just going to add a C chord in there. Next measure, we have A, A. So our first note of that measure is A. That's really what we're looking at there. So now what we got to do is we got to figure out of our, especially our primary chords, remember that was C major, F major, or G major, which of those primary chords does the A fit into? Well, it doesn't fit into C major. That's made of the notes C, E, and G. What about F? Well, hey, F does fit because of F, A, there we have a match. So you're looking to see what chords a match with your melody. What about the G chord? Well, no, because that's G, B, and D, and you have an A here. So we're going to choose an F chord for that second measure. You only need one chord per measure. And hey, that sounds pretty good so far. That's perfect. Now, the next measure is more Fs again. So, why don't we try another F chord? You can have the same chord in a row, sometimes for a very long time. So let's try the F chord, see if that works out. Wow, that sounds pretty good. So and then the next measure has a D. I might want to move these chords down because as I noticed they're crossing over a little bit. But here in this next measure, we have D, D, C. So this first note is D. So now we got to figure out which of our primary chords best fits that D. Well, C major ain't going to do it. That ain't it, chief, because you got C, E, and G, and that doesn't match. What about F major? F, A, and C doesn't match. Oh, hey, G major has a D in it. Boom. We're going to use that G major chord there. And as you're going along, let me see if it'll let me do this. Then as you're going through, you want to start writing in whatever chords that you're using. So C, you got F, we had F again, G there, just so you can keep track of it. As you get really good at it, you're really not going to have to worry about that anymore because you'll be able to just fill them in on the spot. But in the beginning, that's what you want to do. Okay, next measure here, we have G in the beginning of that measure. So now we got to figure out which of our primary chords does G fall into? Well, hey, it actually fits into C, so that's an option. Does it fit into F at all? Well, no, F doesn't have a G in it, but G has a G in it, doesn't it? Well, then you can choose either one here, or you can choose the G chord. I think that the G chord works a bit better there, so I'll use G there. And then the next measure has an E. Well, we can probably use C major. F doesn't work or G doesn't work. So G. That sounds pretty good. If you really wanted to mess around with it, you could choose some of your secondary chords as well. But that looks like it's working out so far. And at the very end, I will write these all in, and then I'll go through and play them. Okay, and then at the end, we just kind of have that twinkle, twinkle, little star thing again. So you can actually use the same chords we had in the beginning. C, F, and then F again. And then at the end, what I would do, see how that sounds weird there? I put the G chord right before the end. But when I hit that final note, that didn't sound too good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a C chord right at the end. Oh, that sounds so good. Okay, I'm going to go through and play it with all the chords we had added in. I'm just going to quickly write them in. Now those sound pretty good, but what you're going to find sometimes is that you'll play through it, and this is just actually another step in the whole thing. You'll play through it and you'll be like, oh, you know what, there was that one spot that I think would have sounded a lot better, maybe with another chord. And I think it was really here in the second measure. Okay, and then as I was going through it, I kind of realized that playing through here, as I was playing through this spot right here, on the second line, I kind of felt like there should have been another C chord in there as well. So I would write another C chord right there, and then just kind of playing through the rest of it. So as you can see, you might want to go through a few times, trial and error, and there are multiple answers to some of these chords that you can put in there. As you saw, that if you have two chords that have the same note in common, you can actually choose between them. Just make sure to choose the primary chords over the secondary chords, and you'll be all right. If you really want to get good at this stuff, you need to check out some of these other music theory lessons. They're going to teach you a lot more about chords, key signatures, and all the things we talked about today, but in more depth, so that you can master them and apply them on command. So this has been your piano teacher, Tim, here. Thanks for coming by, and I'll see you in the next lesson.